My group looked at gender identity in the workplace, comparing Pakistan and the US. My name is Bergen, and my group members were Sam, Janie, Cooper, and Abby.
The official religion of Pakistan is Islam. Islam has been in the area long before Pakistan was established and has been accepted broadly. The constitution is a modern democratic constitution with Islamic ideology as its guiding principle. Contrary to the United States, there is no separation of church and state. Islam is not the only religion in Pakistan, but it is the most dominant. Although not everyone in Pakistan is Muslim, the laws and practices are respected and followed by all citizens. Pakistan is also a collectivist culture, meaning that people are interdependent and do things for the society or their family rather than only for themselves. This is shown in many ways, such as working to provide for your family or helping friends and family in times of need. The working environment is much more relaxed in Pakistan in terms of flexibility with time off for family events. Ever since the beginning formation of Pakistan by the East India Company in 1857, there have been varying opinions and beliefs about the transgender community. In the 1850s, the community was referred to as Hydras. Rulers and leadership chastised this community and considered their gender identity immoral. Their practices were criminalized, and eventually, rulers at the time decided to take away many of their rights, such as the ability to rent free land. As time went on, these beliefs that Hydra were immoral and wrong continued, and the community was treated very poorly and even considered a threat to colonial rule. In 1871, a Criminal Tribes Act was put into place, which targeted the transgender community, who is now considered a criminal tribe. This act criminalized people dressing as their preferred gender identity and gave naysayers the protection to discriminate against the community. Not only this, but it was also illegal to not report any transgender activity that people may see. In 1947, Pakistan was established as a state. A few years after becoming established, Pakistani government repealed the CTA. Pakistan then formed its own constitution in 1973, but transgender rights were not given until years later. In 2013, the Pakistani Supreme Court ruled the transgender community would be given legal status and identity rights. Later in 2018, the Transgender Persons Act was put into place. This act was established to put protection over the transgender community, but there have been varying opinions and situations where this was not the case. The United States is a very individualistic country. People are much more independent with friends and family. People in the United States often work to fulfill their own needs or immediate family's needs. The working culture in the US can be very dog eat dog in the business world and is not known to be flexible and accommodating. It is often frowned upon to take time off for family or even to cash out paid time off benefits. These factors play into the United States being a very individualistic, work-driven culture. The United States has also decided on separation of church and state, unlike Pakistan. There is no official religion of the US, and this will hold true as it is the First Amendment. The US Constitution was established in 1787, but did not place protection over all people until 1868, when the Fourth Amendment was ratified. This is a broad law which stated that no state will deprive anyone of life, liberty, or property. At the time, transgender issues were not the focus and were not directly stated in the Constitution. A key case in 1959, which was widely recognized, occurred in New York when a transgender woman was denied a marriage license because the sex she was assigned at birth. This was part of the gay rights movement, and it pulled much more attention to the discrimination transgender people were being exposed to. In 1989, some real change started happening, and the Supreme Court ruled that transgender people will be able to take action against employers that discriminate based off of gender identity. As time has continued, there has been protection placed upon all gender identities, but there has also been lots of pushback. There is not full support by all citizens of the United States or government officials, but hopefully within the next few years, there will be more acceptance of transgender people in America.
Now we're going to talk about aspects of identity within the United States. So to start, we're going to talk about the recognition of gender within the United States, and that is going to be very different from what it is in Pakistan. Here, there is a lot of acceptance for gender, depending on who you ask. We can get into left-wing versus right-wing views. Here in Washington, here in Bellingham, there's a lot of support for trans, for queer, for LGBT, all of that kind of stuff. Whereas maybe if you were in Texas, that wouldn't be quite the case. When we go into legality, same-sex marriage is legal in most places within the United States. And if you look into the military and the military's laws, you are allowed to join the military if you are trans, gay, etc. Moving towards culture within the United States, GSA, LGBT clubs, organizations, LGBT pro organizations are very common throughout the United States. You'll see like gay clubs throughout most colleges or high schools, etc. And going into that further, a lot of this is existing because there's a separation of the church and the state, the United States. The church and their anti-gay, usually laws, are not dictating every rule that we make outside of that. Now we're going to move on to the aspects of identity within Pakistan, and these are going to be very different from that in the United States. So to start, we're going to go over gender tolerances again. I'm going to start this off by going over the acceptance, which is a lot lower than it is in the United States. A lot of times, parents do not support their kids if they are transgender, gay, they want to change their gender, etc. And they really won't recognize it most of the time. Obviously, there's going to be some outliers in this. Not everyone's going to not recognize that, but the vast majority do. There is something called the Transgender Persons Act. And what this act covered is that transgender people, or those who do not abide by the strict male or female, can choose the gender they identify as. Again, there's a pretty low approval rating, and just because you can choose it doesn't mean most people will recognize that. But in the eyes of the government, you can. So moving on to culture, we have politics and religion, and those two are very deeply intertwined. Religion and politics are not separate like they are in the States. They're very much connected, and so one affects the other. Religion and their religions do not approve of like gay, queer, LGBT, etc. And so therefore, most of the time, politics will either. Moving on to the legality of things. To start, I want to talk about the military. In the military within Pakistan, if you are transgender, you cannot join the military, and that's a pretty like a strict no on that one. And oftentimes, transgender people can face some pretty harsh laws, including things like imprisonment. So now I'm going to directly compare and contrast Pakistan and the United States when it comes to culture. I'm going to start with the opposites, and there are a lot of opposites. There's the military. Transgender people within the United States can join and serve in the military, whereas in Pakistan, they cannot. When it comes to religion and politics, which is the biggest divide, here in the United States, there is a strong separation between church and state, whereas Pakistan, there is not. Here in the US, religious rules are not going to directly impact like governmental laws and things of that sort, whereas in Pakistan, they will. Oftentimes, religious laws are governmental laws as well. Here in the United States, there's a lot of support for trans and gay people and people of that sort in the form of like GSA clubs, there's transgender bathrooms. I mean, if you look here at Western Washington University, there's like trans bathrooms all over the place and there's signs all over kind of supporting them. Whereas in Pakistan, that's really not the case. while there is still some support, it's very small compared to here in the United States. Really, transgender bathrooms are practically non-existent, whereas in here they're somewhat common. And over there, they face a lot more discrimination than you likely would here in the United States. And that brings us to similarities. Kind of building off those last points, there is a very strong divide in each country. I mean, if you look at the US, there's the red versus blue states, and I mean, support will for GSA will vary quite a bit. Here in Washington, there's a lot of support, but if you look at Texas or most of the Midwest, that's really not going to be the case. It's going to be closer to Pakistan. Whereas in Pakistan, there's really not so much support. There is in some cases, obviously, there are gay people and trans people within Pakistan, but they are very much the minority.
All right, next up we have strengths and challenges in reference to gender in Pakistani workplaces. In Pakistan, there are many strengths and weaknesses in regards to gender in the workplace, although the women face a majority of the challenges. Men often hold higher positions and work in different fields than many of the women. One major factor that causes this is education expenditure in the average Pakistani household is often more expensive for women than it is for men. This is due to things such as their uniforms being more expensive due to reasons like the country's strict religious beliefs on modesty. Another factor that makes education expenditures higher for women is the need for a safer mode of transportation. Women are often faced with the unfair pay between them and other male colleagues that hold the same or similar positions. This is partially due to cultural beliefs that hinder them from a young age. Although, with the recent strides being made towards Pakistan becoming more progressive, this hopefully will become less of a commonality in the future. Lack of education is one of the biggest challenges faced by women to find work in Pakistan and is often caused by their cultural beliefs about gender roles. In an article we found written by Aslam and Gandhi Kingdon states, even if returns to education were similar for males and females, or even higher for females, the part of the return to a child's education that accrues to the parents is likely to be higher from the son's education than from the daughter's, since in societies such as Pakistan, sons provide old age support for their parents, while any economic return to a daughter's education are reaped by their in-laws. Alright, for strengths and challenges in reference to gender in Pakistan workplaces continued. Currently, Pakistan suffers very large gender gaps in the workplace, with only 8% of the country's workforce being women. Traditionally, women and men often have very different career paths, although the private sector is pushing new incentives to help change this social standard. Women previously lacked the freedom to pick whatever career they desired, although one new incentive that will hopefully help change this is the Employer for Gender Balance Award. The Pakistan Business Council is a business advocacy forum comprised of the country's largest businesses. They are taking many steps to try and motivate businesses to hire more women and create diversity, such as creating the Employer for Gender Balance Award. The Employer Gender Balance Award is awarded yearly to companies that have shown the biggest advancement in reducing gender gaps. Incentives such as these are helping the business culture in Pakistan become more progressive, increasing diversity in business and increasing women's opportunities for more career paths as more and more companies become motivated to adopt these same policies. Workplace harassment is looked at very differently in Pakistan as compared to the US. Harassment is a rising problem, especially with the progression of women now working in higher careers. Women often feel that they cannot come forward about workplace harassment due to the lack of job security and the fear of being judged by others. Second, general workplace harassment is often perceived as part of the job by most women unless it is sexual harassment, which is more recognized in Pakistan. This is likely to reduce morale, productivity, and create many other negative effects within Pakistani companies. Next up, we'll be looking at strengths and challenges in reference to gender in U.S. workplaces. Women's workplace rights in the United States would be considered pretty well established compared to looking at other countries around the world, especially Pakistan. This isn't the truth, though, as many women still face hardships, whether it's pay gap, harassment, or just being underrepresented, especially in higher level positions. The Family and Medical Leave Act was passed in 1993 and provides employees with 12 weeks of unpaid leave, although there are some requirements employees need to meet before they qualify for these benefits. Employees must have worked for the company for a minimum of 12 months, worked at least 1,250 hours in that time, and also worked at a location where 50 or more employees operate there or within 75 miles. And these numbers were provided by Zippia from a study in 2022. Next up, many women also struggle to find jobs with flexible scheduling, which is important if they are a mother or a caregiver. Women have struggled to find jobs that adapt to their needs with things such as paid maternal leave. Women are often underrepresented, especially in top-level positions, because people assume that women are too emotional to hold positions of power or even require too many special needs with policies such as paid maternal leave. According to a new research by Zippia, also in 2022, currently only around 40% of private companies offer paid maternity leave in the U.S., although some states have passed laws requiring businesses to offer paid maternity leave statewide. Hopefully, in the next few years, this will be required nationwide, which would be a huge step for women's rights. In the U.S., we are progressing towards a more supportive work environment, providing employees with resources such as HR to help diminish workplace harassment. These resources give women the ability to report such incidents to a different sector of the company and not have to report it directly to their supervisor. This is important since it is often uncomfortable for employees of both genders to report to their direct supervisor, and often helpless if these issues are actually being caused by their supervisor, and fear that there may be negative impacts of reporting these issues. Overall, departments such as HR in U.S. companies are a vital part of increasing women's safety and workplace rights. And looking at the graph from Business Insider, you can see that the gender wage gap from 1980 to 2020, and the gender wage gap has been closing slightly throughout the past 30 years, although you can see that the most significant progress has been made within the last 5 years, and hopefully this trend continues on.
Next, we will be moving on to the recommendations for both the U.S. and Pakistan. But a disclaimer for both of these recommendations. Results may vary for each country. It is hard for both countries to find a super solid recommendations from each other. For example, if Pakistan follows the exact footsteps of the American model, they will not have the same results because of the cultural differences of both countries, which we've highlighted just before this. We've gone over the cultural differences between both countries and know that they cannot follow the same paths to more inclusive work environments for transgender individuals, so that the way they will have to go about an inclusive workplace is very different. So the recommendations we make for Pakistan from the U.S. perspective is given pretty lightly. As Bergen hit on before, some challenges and gender differences in the workplace is education and accessibility to education. Not only is it just for women, but for everyone in Pakistan. Having education accessible for everyone can be a cornerstone treatment for how to nurture transgender individuals in the workplace. When people are unable to get educated about certain problems other countries are facing, like transgenderism, it can be a stumbling block for people. They only learn from what has been taught by the culture, and not learn things outside of what the culture or religion has been telling them before. Another general just recommendation that can be made is called signaling. This idea comes from a source we found when researching this. There was a study done on transgender individuals living and working in Pakistan. And from the study, we learned about signaling and what that exactly means. So signaling is used to combat stigma theory. So for stigma theory, according to our article, is that gender identity minorities have the tendency to conceal their identity when they are expecting to become negatively marked by their coworkers, which leads to negative consequences. So to combat being negatively marked or just the stigma theory, they can use this thing called signaling. The transgender individual gives signs to their gender identity, but not fully revealing their own identity yet, and not fully coming out or just saying it. This has worked in countries like the U.S. well and can be used in the workplace in Pakistan. And for perspective changing, this part, if Pakistan was more educated, they may be able to change perspective on what constitutes as a transgender individual. Like Abby hit on at the beginning, just recently has Pakistan made a bigger difference on what is counted as a transgender identity in Pakistan. Now it is up to Pakistan to believe in those policies too and change their perspective about them. They can't leave it up to a small group of individuals or just different-minded people in Pakistan to believe in their policies. It must become fruition in all Pakistanis' lives too. But some of the legislative acts that the U.S. has implemented can be possible for Pakistan, but it may take a while for it to actually take for Pakistanis. The laws can be passed, but the people have to act on them pretty much. We've already seen with laws passed in Pakistan, they are great and really pushing forward for transgender people. But one big issue Pakistanis are facing is that they're not pretty much acting on the policies they're putting out there. People are still being discriminated against. It's embedded into their culture, and it can be really costly for their company. So instead of recommending to apply more laws and legislations for this recommendation part, something the U.S. might benefit more than Pakistan is just more laws and rules. It's important to point out to companies that just the way they think is being costly for the company. So for this last part, the costs, my main recommendation, or our main recommendation for organizations in Pakistan, is realizing the costs of discriminating against transgender people can have on their company. So one article found from one of our readings this quarter hits on this main subject very well. The article is titled "The Cost of the Closet and the Rewards of Inclusion: Why the Workplace Environment for LGBT People Matters to Employers." This article was written by the Human Rights Campaign Foundation in America. This article is a great recommendation for organizations in Pakistan from the U.S. Some of the main points that this organization has found for workplaces in America are this: employees that are hiding their identity are costly. The costs that come with them are engagement and retention in the company. Productivity lowers when they're not allowed to be who they really are. And 10% of LGBT people leave their job because they feel unwelcome for being who they are. So this proves that closeting people is proven to cost companies money. Pakistan citizens need to realize this. Because of the way their culture treat people, it may cost their own companies too. And so the first action step for organizations in Pakistan is this: realize the impact of their beliefs and culture. Realize that the impact of their beliefs and cultures not only impact their employees, but the overall health of a company.
Today I'm going to be talking about recommendations for organizations in the United States, the United States culture compared to Pakistan, Pakistan rights and current legislation, and what can the U.S. learn from each Pakistan's culture and/or diversity and inclusion practices. So the United States and Pakistan are very different within their cultures and laws. The United States over the past few years have become increasingly more progressive with their culture, as well as diversity and inclusion practices. Families in American culture tend to live apart from each other, while on the other hand, Pakistani culture families traditionally stay together due to financial issues. In the past, females have been discouraged from education because of their norms and values and religion within Pakistan. Pakistan is nowhere near where the United States is on transgender issues. However, the United States can learn from Pakistan by enforcing laws to protect transgender rights that Pakistan has not yet enforced. Pakistan, however, is not completely lacking in the protection of transgender rights, as Pakistan's parliament approved the Transgenders Person Act in 2018. Section 3(2) of the Pakistani law provides an unchallengeable right of gender, which is very progressive for their country. This, however, is worrisome because this makes the entire transgender rights in Pakistan form into another direction for rights of LGBT, which was not the main point of this legislation. This allows for anyone to claim to be transgender and receive the benefits, in turn hurting the transgender community. The actual transgendered individuals could lose their credibility within their society. Earlier drafts for transgender Pakistanis required medical checks and examinations to find the true gender of a person in order to receive the benefits. After some strong movements and lobbying in the new legislation, it entirely removed these clauses. For the United States to ensure that they create more inclusive policies for transgender employees, it is important for them to understand the barriers that they face. In Pakistan, a woman politician by the name of Kashish was disowned by her family at a young age for being transgender. Many people from the transgender community often face violence and threats in Pakistan. A Pakistani rights organization has reported more than 50 transgender deaths in the past 3 years. The transgender community in Pakistan is oftentimes abandoned by their families and relegated to mostly begging due to the social stigma and routinely receive death threats or fatal attacks because of this. Bindia Rana was one of the first legally recognized members of the transgender community in Pakistan to stand for the election in 2013. She ran because she wanted to show the people that transgenders can be just as capable as anyone else and inspire others to do the same. Despite the new law, there is no reservation for transgenders in government bodies. The National Census has listed over 10,000 transgenders in Pakistan, but the actual number is much higher. She feels as though the government doesn't consider transgenders as citizens. For the United States to become even more progressive, they will need to have more transgender representatives within the government. This in turn will create equal laws for transgenders, especially in the workforce of America. A quote from Nayab Ali, who was a transgender candidate in the 2018 election, says, "Until you can influence laws, you are their slaves." Overall, what the United States should take away from Pakistan's practices is that we must be accepting of all parties no matter their identity, gender, or race. Since the majority of Pakistan follows the Muslim religion pretty strictly, the laws that they have in Pakistan may be perceived as sexist or discriminatory towards women and transgender people in the United States. Although Pakistan is making strides towards equality, they still have a lot of work to do. The United States must learn from this by enforcing more rights against discrimination, which is still very prominent in the United States as well today. The future of our laws do not only matter for the dignity of the transgender community, but for their health as well. Marginalized groups in America face many health challenges as a result of the discrimination they have to face on a day-to-day basis.
And lastly, here are our references. Thank you for your time.